On this episode of China Uncensored, President Trump goes back in time to the 1970s to stop a master criminal from stealing top-secret technology. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. On Monday, August 14th, President Donald Trump announced an investigation into China's unfair trade practices.
The theft of intellectual property by foreign countries costs our nation millions of jobs and billions of dollars each and every year. For too long, this wealth has been drained from our country while Washington has done nothing.
Yeah, Washington. All you do is hang around with that smug look on your face. Anyway, Trump authorized U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer to use the Trade Act of 1974 to investigate China's unfair policies and practices, especially with regard to the theft of American intellectual property. What's that, Shelley? Trump actually ordered Lighthizer to look into whether to investigate China for unfair trade practices. So it's like a pre-investigation investigation. But wait. My favorite Chinese state-run media was quick to inform us that Trump's trade war, pre-investigation, could backfire. It says China is expected to retaliate, and then it suggests that China should make use of the World Trade Organization mechanism to sue the U.S. for trade protectionism. The angry reaction from Chinese state-run media tells us one thing: Trump's pre-investigation is a great idea. Even Democrats are supporting Trump's tougher stance on China trade. Here's what's behind it. For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has been using a variety of unfair and even downright illegal methods to steal foreign technology and then use it to outcompete the companies that invented that technology. Remember how I talked about WeChat? Yeah, they borrowed a lot of their ideas from foreign companies. But what President Trump is referring to is more specific. It's about investigating whether the CCP is forcing or pressuring American companies to share their intellectual property with Chinese companies. The CCP has the long-term goal of having Chinese companies learn from Western companies and eventually replace them. For example, Ford Motor Company wanted to open a bunch of car manufacturing plants in China, but the Chinese government had a requirement. Ford had to do it as a joint venture with a local Chinese company, Changang Motors. And as another condition of access to the Chinese market, the Chinese government forced Ford to open a research and development laboratory in China that they also had to share with Changang Motors. There was a similar case with General Motors. GM wanted to sell its electric hybrid, the Chevy Volt, in China. The Chinese government provides huge subsidies on qualifying electric vehicles, as much as $19,000 off the retail price of each car. It's to encourage Chinese consumers to buy them. But they refused to give the subsidy for the Chevy Volt. That is, until GM agreed to transfer some of their highly sensitive engineering technology to a local Chinese competitor. Here's another example. Under a recent Chinese cybersecurity law, U.S. technology companies are required to store user data from Chinese customers on servers inside China. According to this article, technology firms are forced to turn over source code and encryption software to the government, potentially giving the Chinese government a backdoor into private data and proprietary technologies. Plus, this article about Apple says that provincial authorities plan to create a working committee chaired by Communist Party members to oversee the U.S. company's iCloud facility that they're building in China. And I could go on and on with examples, but you get the idea. The CCP is forcing U.S. companies to turn over intellectual property in exchange for being allowed to do business in China. So what President Trump did on Monday was authorize U.S. Trade Representative Lighthizer to determine whether China should be investigated for this under the Trade Act of 1974. If Lighthizer decides to investigate, and then if unfair trade practices are found, the president can punish China by imposing tariffs or other restrictions.
And this is just the beginning. I want to tell you that. This is just the beginning.
The Trade Act of 1974 was widely used during the Reagan era, but hasn't been used as much in recent years because of a requirement to work with the World Trade Organization before using it, which Trump has implied he might not do. But it's not like previous administrations did nothing about the Chinese Communist Party's intellectual property theft. For example, under President Obama, the White House focused on cracking down on the CCP stealing intellectual property by using hacking and cyber spying. The Justice Department even brought criminal charges against PLA soldiers for hacking into U.S. companies, including Westinghouse and U.S. Steel. But it's not an easy issue to deal with, since the Communist Party's intellectual property theft stretches back for decades. According to this article, China's relentless quest to be a technology leader has deep roots stretching as far back as the 1950s. And in March of 1986, the CCP began the 863 program. According to the Office of National Counterintelligence Executive, Project 863 provides funding and guidance for efforts to clandestinely acquire U.S. technology and sensitive economic information. That was 1986. But China's intellectual property theft really kicked off in 2001, when China got access to the World Trade Organization. President Clinton did the legwork to get China into the WTO, and President Bush finished the job. Their idea was to give U.S. companies better access to the Chinese market. But what U.S. companies got was this.
Congressional leaders say China is engaged in economic espionage on a scale never seen before.
So maybe, just maybe, the WTO mechanisms aren't doing what they're supposed to protect American companies. That's why President Trump is pulling an obscure 1974 law out of the dusty avocado green filing cabinet and putting it to its original purpose, giving the U.S. government the power to punish foreign countries for unfair trade practices. So, will it work? Well, it's going to be a long process. For example, if the U.S. Trade Representative decides to investigate China, it may take up to a year for that to finish. But one thing's for sure, the CCP doesn't like it. And they wouldn't express grave concern if it were nothing. Thanks for watching China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. You know what else would be a very big move? Supporting China Uncensored. YouTube ads aren't enough to fund our team to do episodes like this. That's why viewers like you have joined the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army. Yes, join my team of supporters who contribute a small amount of money for each episode we publish. Click here now to visit our webpage on patreon.com and support us.